Good evening and welcome to a program devoted entirely to Lefties Losing It. Let's start with some morally repugnant depravity on CNN. Here they interview Taylor Lorenz, a far-left hack journalist who's been employed by many of your favourite lefty outlets, from the Washington Post to the New York Times to Daily Beast. Listen here as Taylor waxes lyrical about cold-blooded murdering scumbag Luigi Mangione. She can't understand why anyone would be shocked that sickos like her are standing a murderer. This is sick, sociopathic.
Hilarious to see these millionaire media pundits on TV clutching their pearls about someone standing a murderer when this is the United States of America, as if we don't lionize criminals. You're going to see women especially that feel like, oh my God, right? Like, here's this man who's revolutionary, who's famous, who's handsome, who's young, who's smart. He's a person that seems this morally good man, which is hard to find.
She's talking there about a cowardly killer who shot father of two, Brian Thompson, in the back of the head. But because Brian was the CEO of United Healthcare, apparently that makes his murder okay, or even joyful, as Taylor once claimed. Now, a sane journalist on a sane network might challenge what we just heard, but not CNN, not this clown from CNN. Listen here as he likens admiring and murdering lowlife to being a Trump supporter, and even notes that Taylor would never want to be called a Trump supporter. That would be beyond the pale.
I'm sure you wouldn't like to be compared to a Trump supporter, but some of how people cannot understand why people have sympathies for Mangione strikes me as the same as a lot of media not understanding why people support Trump.
I totally agree.
I've said it before, and I'm sure I'll say it again. You don't hate the leftist media enough. You think you do, but you don't. Sticking with CNN, they've been part of a media meltdown over the Trump administration's tariff policy, and many a Democrat has been on with softball interviews where they scaremonger about inflation without any pushback from the host. Here's Hakeem Jeffries.
Trump tariffs are going to raise costs on everyday Americans in an environment where there's already a high cost of living. Trump promised that he would lower costs, in fact, on day one, but what we've seen under his reckless leadership is that costs aren't going down in America. They're going up. Inflation is going up. Inflation is going up, is it? The Democrats were even pushing a new term, Trumpflation. Here is Jeff Merkley.
So last Wednesday, it was not Liberation Day. It was Trumpflation Day. The American consumer is going to see much higher prices.
Trumpflation, you say? Literally minutes later, this news broke.
Breaking moments ago, brand new numbers showing inflation fell last month. Much better than expected.
Inflation fell. Well, how about that, folks? You know, the only reason anyone not stuck at an airport watches CNN these days is to see Scott Jennings. Here he is with CNN host Abby Phillips.
7 million means that they're not just going after criminals.
Well, they're going after people who are in the country illegally, right?
Yeah, I know, but I'm saying the criminals, this is a much bigger universe.
Doesn't that make you a criminal?
No, it doesn't.
To come across the border illegally?
Coming into the country illegally is a civil offense. It's not a criminal offense.
Okay, if you come into the country illegally, here's the message. We're going to find you and send you back.
Oh, Abby, coming across the border illegally is a criminal offence. Let's have a look at Scott Jennings now effortlessly toying with Ana Navarro. Talk about an intellectual mismatch.
Honestly, if it was Kamala Harris behaving this way, they'd call her hormonal and hysterical, right? Look.
Well, you'd have to get elected to be.
But, well, yes, and if she had been elected and if Hillary Clinton had been elected, if any woman had been elected and been acting this way, they'd say it was menopause.
She would have never stood up to China, so I think this is a mood issue, right?
No.
And let's check in with one of Anna's co-hosts on The View. Here's Whoopi Goldberg. She seems to think that the Trump administration, you know, the one that won in a landslide, winning every swing state, winning the popular vote, winning the Electoral College 312 to 226, apparently, according to Whoopi, they only represent a very narrow band of people.
All you countries who watch us, This is not our wish.
No, it's not.
This is not what the American people want. We don't like it. We don't like how it's being, we don't like how this is being done. That's why you will hear us kvetching about this as long as we are able, because no one we're talking to understands what's going on, and therefore, when they say America, they're not talking about us. They are talking about that very narrow band of America that they think they represent.
Back to CNN. This is how you handle an interview with CNN, especially if they start quoting another fake news outlet like the Washington Post. Let's hear from Senior Director for Counterterrorism, Dr. Sebastian Gorka.
Last month, the Washington Post reported that the freeze on U.S. foreign assistance in Africa has, quote, threatened programs intended to counter al-Shabaab bomb makers. Are those cuts still in place? Are you concerned about them at all?
Is that the same Washington Post that propagated the Russia-Russia collusion hoax for the last 8 years?
Well, regardless of the Russia.
No, not regardless. You're quoting the Washington Post to me, which is as effective as posting for me or quoting to me any other pillar of the fake news industrial complex. I really couldn't care less what the Washington Post or the New York Times says, especially when it's anonymous government officials. If it's true, put your name to it. If it's not, shut up.
There you go. And here is how Donald Trump handled the media overnight. First, he reminded them that his predecessor never did impromptu press conferences.
You people requested. I'm always available, unlike Biden. Think Biden would do an interview at 2 in the morning? He would do one at 9 in the morning.
And he then got his granddaughter, Kai, involved, first introducing her to the members of the fake news media. I've got to say, he really is the funniest president we've ever had.
Kai, come on over here. You know the fake news? This is the fake news.
Hey, what's up, everyone? How are you guys? Good morning.
Good morning. We're just doing a little news conference. You want to partake?
I mean, I'll add some stuff.
She's a great athlete, actually, great golfer.
Yeah.
And great student, actually. So go ahead. Any other questions?
On Monday, you're having a meeting with the president of El Salvador.
It's predictable, but I have more CNN nincompoopery. Yes, that is a word, look it up. Or just watch CNN, because you'll be overwhelmed by nincompoops indulging in endless nincompoopery. I'll be bringing you CNN anchor Caitlin Collins being comprehensively owned soon. But first, let's look at the aftermath and CNN host Dana Bash claiming that it's misinformation to say that CNN is anti-America.
Say, for the record, since we heard President Trump say in the Oval Office that CNN hates our country, CNN does not hate our country. That should go without saying.
Oh, really, Dana? Let's go to the tape. I could play hours of footage of CNN hating on America, but here's just 30 seconds of CNN being anti-American miscreants.
Here's a breaking news. We live in a racist, sexist, homophobic, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic country.
Everything they're doing runs against making America great. Well, it was never great, so I'm not going to say the again part, but making America great.
Kicking off the Independence Day weekend, President Trump will be at Mount Rushmore, where he'll be standing in front of a monument of 2 slave owners and on land wrestled away from Native Americans, told that be focusing on the effort to, quote, tear down our country's history.
Now to what sparked this latest CNN outrage. Earlier today, Caitlin Collins was again advocating on behalf of a gangbanger from El Salvador who was deported to El Salvador. Apparently that is a massive mistake that needs to be corrected. Listen here to how President Trump introduces Caitlin Collins.
Let's hear the question from this very low-rated anchor at CB.
Thank you, President. Do you plan to ask President Bukele to help return the man who your administration says was mistakenly deported? The man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador?
A MS-13 gangbanger in the country illegally. Apparently it's a massive mistake to deport him. Now, President Trump called on the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to respond to the question, and then Stephen Miller. Even Mark Rubio chipped in. Mic drop after mic drop. This was glorious.
First and foremost, he was illegally in our country. He had been illegally in our country. And in 2019, 2 courts, an immigration court and an appellate immigration court, ruled that he was a member of MS-13 and he was illegally in our country.
President Trump then called on senior advisor Stephen Miller to weigh in, given CNN is obsessed with this case.
As you know, it's asked by CNN, and they always ask it with a slant. Because they're totally slanted because they don't know what's happening. That's why nobody's watching them. But would you answer that question also, please?
Yes, gladly. So, as Pam mentioned, there's an illegal alien from El Salvador. So, with respect to you, he's a citizen of El Salvador. So, it's very arrogant even for American media to suggest that we would even tell El Salvador how to handle their own citizens as a starting point. As 2 immigration courts found that he was a member of MS-13. When President Trump declared MS-13 to be a foreign terrorist organization, that meant that he was no longer eligible under federal law, which I'm sure you know, you're very familiar with the INA, that he was no longer eligible for any form of immigration relief in the United States. That neither Secretary of State nor the President could be compelled by anybody to forcibly retrieve a citizen of El Salvador from El Salvador, who again is a member of MS-13, which, as I'm sure you understand, rapes little girls, murders women, murders children, is engaged in the most barbaric activities in the world, and I can promise you, if he was your neighbor, you would move right away.
So you don't plan to ask for it to get him back?
Yep, even after all of that, Caitlin wants to know if Trump is going to ask the gangbanger be returned to America.
Well,
no version of this legally ends up with him ever living here because he is a citizen of El Salvador. That is the president of El Salvador. Your questions about it, per the court, can only be directed to him.
I asked President Bukele, can President Bukele weigh in on this? Do you plan to return him?
Well, I'm supposed to be suggesting that I smuggle a terrorist into the United States, right?
It's always
how can I return him to the United States? Like, I smuggle him into the United States, or what do I do? Of course, I'm not going to do it. It's like, the question is preposterous. How can I smuggle a terrorist into the United States?
Yes, it is preposterous, President Bukele. No one would expect you to smuggle a terrorist into the United States. Other than CNN, of course.
Well, they'd love to have a criminal, released into
I mean, there's a fascination.
They would love it. They're sick. These are sick people. Marco, do you have something to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, Stephen outlined it. I don't understand what the confusion is. This individual is a citizen of El Salvador. He was illegally in the United States and was returned to his country. That's where you deport people, back to their country of origin.
I give up. Even the Secretary of State weighing in wasn't enough for CNN.
Well, Mr. President, you said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago. And they said that it must be facilitated.
Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that? Why do you go over and over? And that's why nobody watches you anymore. You have no credibility.
Like I said, nincompoopery, weapon-grade nincompoopery. He's back. The puppet President Joe Biden has made his first public remarks since he left office in January, and of course, he launched into an incoherent attack against President Donald Trump. It was a mess, folks, a train wreck, just like his presidency. It started badly and it got worse. Let's look at Biden here, ignoring the blaring music and just launching into his speech.
Thank you. We deserve.
Oh, they had to abruptly cut the music because he wasn't stopping, folks. He was going to keep talking even though no one could hear him. Bless. Perhaps they should have kept the music going.
Well, that's what you're all about. That's what the legislation is about. It's about dignity. Simple dignity. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their standing, regardless of the economic situation, regardless of who they are. Making sure that more than 60 million Americans who are living with disabilities are treated with dignity is who we are as Americans. That's what it's about. I mean it.
It was classic Joe Biden, gibberish, barely coherent sentences, bursts of anger and shouting, and whatever this is.
Pulled into the parking lot, and I had never seen hardly any black people in Scranton at the time and I was only going in the 4th grade. And I remember seeing the kids going by at the time called colored kids on a bus going by.
Okay, Joe, you know, Biden's cognitive decline is nothing new. It was evident even before he became president. Remember this?
Got hairy legs that turn blonde in the sun, and the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap.
He learned about roaches. He learned about kids jumping on his lap, and he loves kids jumping on his lap. That was before he was president. Never forget how the leftist media covered up that man's obvious mental decline. Now, talking about mental decline, let's check in with Bernie Sanders, who was at Coachella. Yes, the millionaire socialist with 3 houses thought a music festival was the perfect place for this anti-Trump sermon.
We need you to stand up to fight for justice. He thinks that climate change is a hoax. He is dangerously wrong. And you and I are going to have to stand up to the fossil fuel industry and tell them to stop destroying this planet.
Yes, I'm sure the drugged-up yuppies at Coachella really appreciated that rant, and everything at that music festival is actually dependent on fossil fuels, including the jets the rich and famous take to perform or attend the festival. There was plenty more lefties losing it at Coachella. Here is Kneecap. Kneecap, Google tells me it's a Irish hip-hop group, as if that's a thing. They had the drugged-up yuppies in California singing this delightful tune about Margaret Thatcher.
If anybody was wondering, Margaret Thatcher is still dead. Maggie's in a box, in a box. Maggie's in a box. Na 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 na. Maggie's in a box, in a box. Maggie's in a box.
Yes, the greatest female leader we have seen died at the age of 87 12 years ago, and these sad losers are still chanting about it. And rounding up the Coachella lunacy are middle-aged mascara-wearing pop rockers Green Day, who have taken a break from their pro-Palestinian activism to again rail against MAGA.
Well, maybe I'm American. I'm not a part of a MAGA agenda.
Now, it seemed like only last week we were laughing at Democrat Cory Booker's stunt of talking for 24 hours straight. We wondered whether he was wearing an adult nappy. Those questions were never answered. And bless him, Cory Booker is back now, and he's not only providing lols, but hugs.
What do we got to do about protecting LGBTQ rights and trans rights for those who don't have a voice that can speak up? This is not a costume. This is who I am, and I am not about to let him tell me who I am.
Thank you for coming. So first of all, can I have a hug? Yes.
We've already spoken about the insufferable, self-delighted, rich and famous ladies who went into space for a few minutes, but they keep talking about it, so I've got to cover it. Here is Katy Perry.
I hope they can see the unity that we modeled and replicate that and understand that we weren't just taking up space, we were making space for the future. And for me, like Gail said, this wasn't a ride. wasn't a destination. It was a journey, and it was a supernatural one.
And here is Oprah's bestie, Gayle King, talking about the backlash to all the hyperbole we've heard from these ladies.
This is what bothers me, because I've certainly read some of the things online, coming from people that I know, that I like, that I consider friends. Space is not an either or, it's a both and because you do something in space doesn't mean you're taking anything away from Earth. And what you're doing in space is trying to make things better here on Earth.
And Gayle King claims that these overprivileged women were victims of sexism. How else can you explain this stunt being called frivolous?
What do you think when people say, oh, it's frivolous? Number one, they call it a ride, which I find very irritating because they never say men went for a ride. What do you say to people who think that this was frivolous or just a ride? You know, I think the message that it sends is very, very powerful.
Lauren Sanchez, whose fiancé Jeff owns the rocket, well, she was reduced to tears by the experience.
And 6 women just did the same flight that...
Yeah.
He didn't.
Oh, I just want to keep hugging you.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
And I hope that more people get to see this because I feel I don't even know how much it's going to change me.
And if you thought that was bad, watch this performance from Katy Perry.
Katie!
And George Clooney was on CNN being interviewed by the fawning Jake Tapper. Clooney, sporting one of the worst dye jobs in Hollywood history, is again lying and playing the hero, claiming that it was his civic duty to out Joe Biden for not being up to it and needing to step down.
You yourself did something that a lot of people would call brave when you wrote your op-ed.
Well, I don't know if it was brave. It was a civic duty. When I saw people on my side of the street not telling the truth, I thought that was time to...
Are people still mad at you for that?
Some people, sure. People criticized me. They criticized me because of my stance against the war 20 years ago, and people picketed my movies, and they put me on a deck of cards. And I have to take that. That's fair. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with criticism for for where I stand.
Really, I'm just marvelling at that hair dye. I mean, how? Why? No. We did cover this whole thing when he tried to rewrite history on 60 Minutes a few weeks back. You know, George must think we're all suffering from Biden's cognitive decline because far from taking a principled stance and doing his civic duty, George Clooney was part of the Biden cover-up. Not only did he hold a massive Hollywood fundraiser for Joe Biden, we all remember the president glitching and having to be assisted off the stage by Barack Obama. And then we had the White House lie to us and say the videos of him being helped off stage were right-wing disinformation. I remember all that, and I remember that George Clooney said nothing. That all happened at his event. He didn't do his civic duty then, no. He waited weeks and weeks and weeks. Only after Biden had that disastrous debate performance against Donald Trump did George Clooney write that op-ed. In fact, a couple of weeks after the debate. Now, protests continue against the president, but don't bother asking any of these concerned citizens what they're exactly protesting about.
Can you tell us about your sign today?
Well, he's a liar, don't you think?
What do you think is the biggest lie he's told?
I think everything that comes out of his mouth is a lie. I think everything that he says, you should believe the opposite.
Any specific examples?
Where do I even begin?
Thank you.
What do you...
You can come join.
This is my son, River.
Hi.
What's a lie that Donald Trump has told?
I mean, I don't like him.
They've got no clues. Now, I wonder what this next lass is talking about. Perhaps the Secret Service would care to have a word with her.
There's not someone out there with a terminal illness that's willing to do it? I mean, I'm sure people are willing to help. If you're willing to do it, I think that there are people willing to help organize it.
Now, remember when New York Attorney General, the woman who campaigned on a promise of getting Trump, remember when Letitia James weaponized her office and conjured up absurd charges in order to get Trump? She claims no one is above the law.
Stand up
and enforce the rule of law. The President of these United States is not above the law.
No matter how rich, powerful, or politically connected you are, everyone must play by the same rules.
You were saying?
The Federal Housing Finance Agency has sent a criminal referral to the DOJ accusing James of mortgage fraud. In a letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi, Director Bill Pulte says James appears to have falsified records in order to meet certain lending requirements and receive favorable loan terms. He cited a property in Virginia that she's allegedly claimed as her principal residence.
As a New York elected official, she had to say that her principal residence was in New York. This was an out-of-state residence. But also, they claimed that in some of these forms, she actually states that her father is her husband in order to file as a married couple.
Oh dear, looks like the karma bus has come for Letitia, and maybe she knew it was coming, because watch here at the National Action Network 2025 convention early this month. She looks nervous. She's unraveling.
My mission is clear. I'm focused. I'm prepared. I'm ready. I've been trained by the best. I went to Howard University. I'm not afraid of no president. Donald Trump, we're ready for you. We're coming for you. We're standing up for you. We're fighting on. We're not going down silent. Victory, my friends, is clear. It's now. And I'm not waiting 4 years. I'm waiting 2 until a speaker by the name of Hakeem Jeffries comes to bring us some rest. Come on, ladies. It's up to us. We saved this democracy before. We'll save it now. Let's go.